Hello there, men, and welcome to the Masculinism Movement channel, a place for men to be men and talk about masculinity and men's issues. I'm your host, Brian Crawl, and today I'm going to be mansplaining to you about game hacks that do not work. But before I get started, could you just hit that like button for me? Thanks. As a former dating coach, one of the things I've noticed that men who have trouble getting girls will obsess over is trying to find some sort of hacks that they can do so as to make finding a girl easier. And while a number of theories have been put forth in the red pill and PUA communities over the years about how one can hack the game in order to get lots of girls, many of them unfortunately do not work. As a previous PUA and an international playboy who did 2 world tours, I experimented with most of these hacks. So I can tell you which of them do not work. And unlike the PUA coaches out there who are really just con artists, as a social scientist, I can explain why they don't work as well too. And the only reason that PUA coaches are trying to convince you that they do work is because they're trying to sell you stuff that has a high price tag and is generally not scientific or verifiable. All right, so let's get into the game hacks that do not work and why. The first 2 are actually the most classic examples that are used by many men, mostly ones who are not even PUAs and even simps. So that should tell you how effective they are. And the first is to start a company or become a higher up in one, and then use your high professional status to leverage opportunities with lower ranking female employees. Often ones of a transactional nature, like offering promotions in exchange for sex and stuff like that, which we're all so familiar with, and it's been going on since time immemorial. Except these days, when you do it, you also get to enjoy the perks of becoming part of the Me Too movement and possibly brought up on harassment charges. So that's obviously not a good hack. And then the second, similarly, is attempting to appear higher status and more wealthy than you actually are. You know, by doing things like buying expensive clothes that you can hardly afford, or maybe even going as far as to lease an expensive car that you can't actually really afford, taking out credit cards, going into debt in order to make yourself look like you are a wealthy, high status, successful man when you actually are not, and are just digging yourself into a financial hole. And this is not just a bad idea because of the debt that you will incur, but even if you were finding ways to do this without accruing debt, like getting your suits at thrift stores or on clearance, like I've done with most of mine, living frugally, but still finding ways to make yourself appear higher status and wealthier than you actually are, which is something that a lot of PUAs do become adept at, is still a really bad idea because it will only attract gold diggers who will only be interested in you for the money they think that you have, and it won't be long before they realize you don't have as much as you made them think, and they will discard you and you'll have wasted your time. Financial predators have an instinct about these things, and even if you do fool them, they're just going to try to start mining you for the gold that they think that you have. And then as soon as you start to disappoint them, they're just going to monkey branch elsewhere. And, you're going to basically have spent money on a woman like she's a prostitute. So why wouldn't you just go to a prostitute instead? What you're looking to do is to use money to get sex in a transactional interaction. Then just go to a fucking prostitute. Plus, this seduction tactic's actually being made illegal in some places. So this is another tactic that is basically all risk and no reward. And then the next one is dating much further down the totem pole in attractiveness. So if you're a guy who is like a 7 or an 8 or so, instead of dating another girl who is like, a 7 or an 8 or even a 6, you go for a girl who is like a 5 or maybe even a 4. And this happens often these days with men who are above average looking themselves, settling for average or even below average women. Or guys who are average looking, settling for women who are well below average. I will often see and meet guys with great personalities and looks who have settled for women who aren't really attractive, or are even sometimes overweight. Sometimes even guys who are very fit, who I've met at the gym, like bodybuilders who I have met, have sometimes ended up having girlfriends who were overweight. And I talked to a guy who was a friend of mine who worked at one of the gyms I used to go to for a while, and He said he thinks it's because it's a dating and reproductive strategy, that if you date that far down the totem pole in attractiveness, that the woman is not going to be hypergamous and expect much money or resources from you, but she will be more willing to actually meet you halfway or potentially even be more of the breadwinner. And he said that the guy in question was constantly able to hit up his girlfriend for things he needed when he couldn't afford to buy them for himself. So some men have found that being hypogamous will actually benefit them. And it may also seem like a good idea because less than average women or overweight women tend to put in more effort into sex. They tend to develop their personalities more, to be more intelligent, and seem to have more to offer a guy and be more submissive as well. Generally speaking, obviously we know that there's a lot of really fat feminists who are the opposite of all these. But I found that when you are dating down, more than a notch, like 2 or 3 notches, that the woman really puts in a lot more into the relationship. But yeah, in the end, that still doesn't make them good girlfriends to have. Because what I found in my experience is that them offering you all of these things that more attractive women do not are things that they're doing as part of their own mating strategy, right? They are using their own hack to increase their sexual marketplace value so that they can lock down a higher status guy. So this is basically all just part of a seduction or manipulation, and oftentimes they will end up turning the tables on you once they have locked you down. Trust me, I've dated these women, and it may seem like they have a lot to offer you and make great companions at first, but once you connect with them enough and start acting like a boyfriend, even if you were polyamorous, they will start manipulating you and trying to coerce and control you, and will also offer you less than they were before once they've got you locked down. And you'll also find that their personality, which used to be sweet, will then change, and they will start acting more bitchy and demanding. So basically, once they have officially gotten you, they will stop doing the things that they were doing in order to get you, since they already have you. And instead, they will start taking you for granted just as much as a more attractive girl. Now, the next hack is dating a much older woman. For the same reasons as the previous one, many men think these women will make better partners. They've had more time to develop their personalities and their relationship skills, as well as their sexual skills. They're going to be more relationship oriented because of the fact that, it's later in life for them, so they have to be more serious about a relationship. So they should be putting in more effort into one and making it work, and they should generally have more of an ability to do that and more to offer you than a younger woman, right? Well, no, not necessarily. Just because a woman has lived longer and had more time to spend doing things doesn't mean she's been spending that time doing things that help her to develop her character or make her more intelligent, right? It doesn't mean she's been spending time on self-development or educational activities or learning relationship skills, reading books about communication and relationship work. Honestly, as a person who used to teach relationship skills, I can tell you that almost no women actually do this. Even the women who are so serious about getting a relationship that they would actually hire a relationship specialist to help them, think that if they give me this money, that I'm going to do all of the work for them, right? And give them some magical pill that will change their mind and somehow make them into the woman that a man wants. And they do not do their homework. They don't want to do things like readings and journaling and stuff like that. They don't want to actually do the work. Women with money think that they can just buy the lifestyle that they want, the relationship they want, and all that stuff without having to actually work on it. It is men who take an interest in self-development and doing these things, and it is men who grow over time because of it. Women really don't do this, okay? And just because she's been getting older and having life experiences doesn't mean that she's been maturing and growing wiser either. A woman can spend a lot of time working on her career for 2 or 3 decades and become very successful, but when it comes to her emotions and how she relates to men, she can still be a teenage narcissist mentally. You'd be surprised at how immature some older, successful women can be when it comes to dealing with men. Because honestly, in my experience, I've seen so many older women act like teenage girls. women who were a decade or two my senior, right? And there were a few of them that I actually did date. And even when you're dealing with, the best of the older women who are actually good enough to date, it is really shocking how, once you peel back the layers, they can still be like these narcissistic teenage girls inside. The only thing that happens as they age is they seem more mature, at least, on the first date or when you're first getting to know them, because they are more serious about finding a relationship, and making it official and locking a man down, which means they are going to be more businesslike about it and less fun about it, and are also going to be more hypergamous and more interested in marriage and getting your resources through marriage. While at the same time, they are going to be less likely to be able to start a family with you. So it's a really bad idea to try to date a much older woman. You're not really hacking the system by doing so. And then the next one is dating a richer woman. Sometimes I've heard of men saying, why not just use women for their money and go for an older or less attractive one who you can control and actually get some resources out of the relationship, like I talked about that bodybuilder at the gym. And this is a bad idea for the aforementioned reasons of both of the previous categories, as well as the fact that women who have money, especially if they come from family money, are going to know more about protecting their assets than you know about hypergamy and extracting them. And they're going to have good lawyers to fight you in court if you try to take their assets through marriage. And the courts tend to protect women from men more than vice versa. So, you're setting yourself up for failure and frustration here, and probably fucking a rich, old, ugly woman without really gaining much for it. At least, not as much as you'd hope. I'm sure she would, buy you fancy dinners and, get you gifts and stuff for being a companion of hers. But that, to me, seems like a really disgusting life to live. Doesn't sound like a hack at all to me. But then the next one, conversely, what would be an actual hack, at least what looks to be an actual hack until you really think about it or do it like I have so many times, is dating a much younger woman. After all, there are plenty of younger women out there who prefer older guys, so it's not like it's improbable to do. There's at least some women out there who prefer older guys, depending on your culture and your situation, and other variables. And since they are younger, of course, they are going to be hotter. And if you're looking for a long-term relationship or a family, they're going to be in their prime and be more fertile. But they are not going to be more relationship oriented because they are younger. They're going to be the opposite. They're going to be more flighty and flaky and non-committal. And while you might think, oh, well, I just want them for some casual sexual fun. Well, the younger women who are attractive and are looking for sexual fun with an older guy are, of course, going to be looking for it with the top tier guys, right? So how exactly are you planning on getting a younger girl? You would potentially have to have really good game, or be settling for one who's, not very attractive. Or you could do what the real hack is here, which is to look for girls who have daddy issues and are hypersexual and, have some sort of issues that make them easy for an older guy such as you. And this may sound like a good idea to someone who has an extremely high libido and wants to, live a hedonistic lifestyle of fucking younger girls and will do whatever type of pickup methods it takes to do it. But that is a really bad idea, because younger girls who have daddy issues, enough that they become hypersexual and easy to fuck for just about any older guy, are going to be extremely psychologically unhealthy and emotionally toxic towards the older men who they are relating to sexually, and they are going to be attempting to form a codependent relationship with you, in which they try to make you into not only their sex partner, but their father and their therapist, and probably several other roles that they need you to fulfill for them, because these types of young girls are extremely needy. And the reason they go for older guys is because these older guys generally are more successful and have more resources to be taken advantage of and remind them of their father. And they need a paternal provider in their lives because of the fact that they are so dysfunctional that they cannot really take care of themselves. So dating younger girls, especially the ones who are hypersexual and have daddy issues, is just asking for trouble. You're going to get yourself into some very fucked up situations when you do that, and you're probably going to end up jeopardizing your own mental health. Now, the next hack that gets talked about an awful lot in the MGTOW community, unfortunately, is dating traditional conservative women. Men seem to think that if they want to get a good woman to marry who will be monogamous and loyal, that all they need to do is find a trad con. But this is a logical fallacy. And since it gets talked about so often in the MGTOW community, and I think in the Manosphere as a whole, I'm going to be taking a deeper dive into just this topic in a video of its own coming up next. So you can watch out for that. And I also talked about the myth of female monogamy and why none can be monogamous in another video that I did a while ago, which I've linked below, so you can check both of those out. But let's just say for now that traditional conservative women are still women with female nature who are hypergamous and manipulative and untrustworthy, and who get married for the same reasons as any other woman, and don't have any more healthy relationship skills and get divorced just as often. And similarly, the next hack is dating a religious girl. And again, men think that if they want a monogamous marriage and mother material female, that they should look for religious ones. But this doesn't work for the same reasons as dating a trad con won't. And I've heard of playboys who will actually attend churches just to find conservative women to bed, and who have success doing so. And I've also seen divorce statistics that show that religious women get divorced actually more than non-religious ones. So expecting a religious girl to have more marriage and family values is just another logical fallacy. Again, she is a woman, she has female nature, and she's looking for a man for all the same reasons as every other woman out there. So don't date religious girls for a relationship. But maybe you could just fuck them, and that could work out, but don't drink their Kool-Aid. I myself don't trust any religious types. People who talk to me about their religion all sound like delusional, crazy people to me. So, it just seems like the more you talk to a girl like that, the more you're going to be getting sucked into her own delusions and psychosis about this, crazy reality she believes in. But, maybe you won't. Maybe you could just fuck her and everything would be all hunky-dory there. I wouldn't bet on it, though. Then the next hack is using drugs to get women. An interesting and obviously controversial one. And it is so interesting because I once saw an article in a men's magazine that showed that women had been surveyed about what they felt was most attractive in a man. And the top ranking thing was him having cocaine. And this is obviously very funny. You can see that I'm laughing still about it. And yet it doesn't come as too much of a shock now, does it? Because we all know that there's drug dealers who get lots of hot girls using drugs. I mean, it's been in the media before. There's been in comedy movies and action movies and such. That drug dealer with all of the girls who's just macking it has become a stereotype. But stereotypes are generally true. And the very realistic reason why drug dealers tend to get hot girls is because they are letting the hot girls use their drugs for free, and those hot girls are only using them for their free drugs. And if the guy wants her to have any sort of loyalty to him whatsoever, the only way to do it then is to get her addicted to his drugs so that she becomes codependent upon him for them. And so this is a really risky way to get women. Of course, there's no guarantee that it will even work at all. I mean, not anyone can just buy a whole lot of drugs and then instantly be like Dan Bilzerian, right? Otherwise, everyone would just be doing it. And yet we do know that some men do it. So let's talk about what happens then. If you were to do this and actually get women doing it, what type of women do you think they will be? The kinds that are the most trouble of all. The kinds who have addictive personalities, are adrenaline junkies and high sensation seeking, and thus are probably narcissists, and are also going to have a tendency towards mood swings and histrionics and even psychosis. So that doesn't sound like a really great hack, now does it? No, don't be a fucking idiot, all right, and go trying to get women using drugs. Now the next hack is becoming a nightclub promoter, security guard, bartender, DJ, musician, or someone in the nightlife who women will often supplicate to, because you will have placed yourself above the women in the nightlife. And if you think this will get you laid by club rats, think again. You would still have to have looks and game and something to offer and know how to leverage your status and whatever you have to offer into sex. All that you becoming employed in the nightlife would really do is cause you to meet a lot more girls very naturally who won't reject you straight away. That doesn't mean they're all going to be pulling you into the bathroom to fuck or even handing you their numbers or anything like that. You'd have to know how to play the numbers game, which is not easy with the girls in the nightlife because 100% of them are drunk. And while they are out drinking and partying, you are working, not partying with them. You have to rely upon the next day follow-up when they are sober and don't remember you, or on trying to pull in sync with your work schedule and the end of the night when they are going to be super wasted. Especially considering that there's going to be a difference in the time that the club closes and the time that you get off. Understand, the club will close at 2. And you'll be getting off at like 3. So you have to keep these things in mind. You're still going to have to play the game and deal with logistics and scheduling and such. And also, again, it still would require some level of looks as well. All right, you can't just be hideous and get a job in the nightlife and expect to get laid because of it either. But of all of the hacks, I would say that this is one of the best ones. And it is one that I did for the longest time. Without getting as much results as I feel I ought to have, so eventually I gave it up. I was a nightclub promoter, and it was a job that didn't really pay well, and it, however, was a great hack for me because it gave me a reason to go out and be social and gave me status in the club and made it easier for me to be social. And I could work on my networking skills and building my social network, on making friends as well as picking up chicks. And I could also do work as a social scientist, making observations and such. So I knew that even if I didn't get a lot of girls out of it, it was still worth it for me. And I didn't get a lot of girls out of it, compared with the amount of time I spent doing it. I was doing it mainly because of those other reasons. It was fun and it was also educational and practical, right? So I got a lot out of it, a lot more than women. But if I wasn't a social scientist, wasn't interested in social networking and making friends, wasn't interested in going out for any of those reasons except to pick up chicks, it would not have been worth it. And what this hack did was basically got me tons and tons of phone numbers. All I had to do was post up at the door somewhere where all the girls were passing by when they were entering the club and let them know that I was a promoter and get their information, tell them that I can get them discounts and such. Or I could go around to every girl that I was attracted to and do the same thing. And then I had to just follow up and try to convert the leads into dates. And while I got a shitload of numbers, the conversion rate into dates was extremely poor. I did get some girls as a nightclub promoter, but honestly, I got way more out of it as a social scientist and someone who was trying to practice networking and become more extroverted. So it wasn't a loss because of that, but otherwise, it would have been a huge waste of time. Because if I were to compare the numbers of closes that I got from that versus online dating at the time, I would have been better off not going out at all. And the only reason that I had any success at all as a nightclub promoter was because I was also a PUA who knew game. All right, because I knew lots of guys who worked as promoters, even in Las Vegas, who didn't get laid because they didn't know game. So again, unless you're really good looking, you can't just get employed in the nightlife and expect to start getting chicks. All this means is that you're going to be meeting a lot more women and you're going to have slightly higher status in the environment. So you're going to be getting rejected less, but that doesn't mean you're going to get laid more. Now, the next hack is becoming a dominant or dom in BDSM. And this is something that I also did for almost a decade. And what you'll find if you try to do this is that the kink community is actually a closed culture. And you actually have to get educated and know your shit before women in it will fuck you. Unless you want to fuck some newbie or some troll that will just be awful. And honestly, almost all the women in the kink community are varying degrees of awful trolls. It's like a sexual sewer, to be honest. And as a dom, I would almost exclusively fuck girls who I met outside of the kink community and just try to convert them into being kinky with me, even if, they had never done anything kinky before. I found this so much better than trying to fuck the girls who are already in the kink community because they are just such degenerates. And if you do try to become a dom or just start calling yourself one, which is what most guys who are using this hack are doing. They're just applying the title of dom to themselves, usually after having seen 50 Shades of Grey, and thinking, I'm going to go find, a kink community meetup or something, or find a kink community website like FetLife, and I'm going to be able to just start fucking submissive girls who want a man to dominate them. But like I said, Being a dom is a skill set that takes years to learn and master with lots of education and practice, and not knowing what you're doing is actually dangerous. So any girl who knows what she's doing and is a real submissive will know if you do not know what you're doing and will avoid you. All right, just as how, when you're talking to someone who isn't an expert in something that you are, you can tell. So no, you can't just go and become Christian Grey by calling yourself a dom. And also, the real subs in the community, especially the very few attractive ones in it, will have their pick of many much better doms than you. And most of them are already taken, or as they often call it in the kink community, owned. So because it's a relationship with a dom and he dominates her, the commitment is supposed to be stronger. So there's even less chance of you stealing her away from her dom, because she's going to be even more committed and controlled by him than a normal girl would by her regular boyfriend or husband. And while the real subs are usually taken, the ones that aren't taken aren't for a reason, because they are loose cannons, and the real doms out there in the kink community don't want to deal with them. As are most all of the newbie subs as well, who don't know what they're doing, or often even what they want or who they are sexually, and are often so terrible at communicating about sex and consent and navigating BDSM that if you don't know what you are doing to compensate for their lack of it, you are setting yourself up for some serious sexual assault allegations. And the funny thing about BDSM is that a lot of it technically is legally sexual assault in the eyes of the Justice Department, and even if a girl has given you her consent to do it to her, if anyone finds out about it, you can and will get arrested and prosecuted for sexual assault. And many of the sex acts done in BDSM, if they are being done without being properly educated, are dangerous and can actually cause injury or death, which is why it is not technically legal even with her consent. So BDSM comes with some very serious risks, and unless you have these actual fetishes for real and feel a primal need to fulfill those urges like I used to, there's no good reason for you to try to partake of that lifestyle. And then the final game hack is one I think you've all probably been waiting to hear about, and that is geo-maxing. This is basically going to a culture where your sexual marketplace value is higher because of your perceived higher status and wealth, due to your greater purchasing power, as well as potentially, hopefully, having some more exotic characteristics that are sought after in that culture. So an American going south of the border to Mexico, for instance, would be a great example of geo-maxing. And I've done this and lived in Mexico for half of a year, 1 year. And I've also done 2 world tours and been an international playboy. And I can tell you that geo-maxing just isn't all it's cracked up to be. Because again, if I wasn't doing it as a social scientist for the educational opportunity, it would not have been worth it. Because first of all, travel is insanely expensive, even when you find all of the ways possible to save money and do it on a strict budget. It is still one of the most expensive things you can do. So if you are traveling to get laid or find a relationship or whatever, that is like paying for the most expensive woman possible. All right. And while, yes, once in a while you will find a certain culture does make it noticeably easier for you to get dates, which cultures those are and how exactly it's going to work are all a gamble, really. And I say gamble here because it's not just reliant upon game and looks and money and, the basics that we're used to, but you have to be able to adapt to your new cultures. And you will find that dating and courtship and sexual traditions and rituals may be very different, and there's going to be cultural barriers that are challenging for you, and even culture shock that you experience. And even when you are going to the cultures that have been recommended by the travel PUAs that write these travel PUA blogs and happen to sell travel PUA products, you will find that many of these cultures have been overrated and oversold to you by them. And just like with the PUAs in your own country, there's a special set of circumstances that this guy has in place for himself that is why he's getting laid in that culture that you do not have. You cannot just go and transplant yourself into that culture and suddenly be just like him. Understand? So many of the cultures that it is said to be easy to get laid in as a, whatever person you are, it's probably going to be overrated and disappointing for you. And you also really don't know how much time it's going to take and what your conversion rates are realistically going to be, and what your logistics are going to be, how easy it's going to be for you to actually make dates happen and make sex happen. So figuring out how much time to spend in a culture in order to get laid in it is really problematic. There's really no good way to tell how much gaming you have to do in a culture in order to get laid in it. And when I was on tour, I was spending just like a week or two in each place, and there were plenty of cultures that I spent a week or more in and didn't get laid once and struggled with game throughout the whole entire process. Like, wasn't only not getting laid, but was struggling to even get phone numbers and dates. And many of these cultures were ones where I was taught it was supposed to be easy for a white American man to get laid in. And as for the cultures where there was a greater level of ease in getting women, well, that also came at extra cost, because it meant I'd have more numbers of girls to sift through to find the ones who were down to fuck. And I still had to deal with the girls who would change their mind and cancel the last moment, and act all flaky. And then I'd have to deal with, their female bullshit like insecurities, jealousy, drama, emotional games, manipulation, general toxicity, unless I wanted to just pay for sex and hire sex workers. And since I didn't want to do that, I had to instead spend time with them, hanging out, maybe even take them out on dates. And of course, I would find out oftentimes that they were only seeing me because they thought they could get things out of it. And if they wanted to date me ongoing, it was because they wanted some serious resources like a visa. So you're paying all this money to travel just to date women who still use you for money. And if you add up all the costs, it cannot be less than what it would have cost you to stay at home and date girls who wanted you for your money. And attempting to geo-max opens you up to some of the worst gold diggers and financial predators in the world, and again has more risk than reward. And so what I found was that it was often a waste of time just to get sex that, while I may not have had that kind of sex with, that kind of exotic looking woman back home, in the end, it didn't seem like the sex was much better than the sex I got from women back home. And when it came to playing the game in order to get the sex, I was still putting in about the same amount of time and effort in order to get about the same average closing rates, and it still cost money. And while it may have taken less money to go on dates than it would have back at home, I still had to pay for the plane tickets, which were extremely expensive and made the entire thing cost more than dating back home. And when I look back on my world tours and the time that I spent on them with women, I think to myself, wow, those women took me away from other things I could have been doing in that exotic culture. All right, so I really probably should have just hired a exotic sex worker, not even in that culture, but back home. I mean, in America, we have people from every culture. So instead of spending all the money to go to that culture and fuck women there, I could have just, looked up an escort that had the ethnicity that I wanted to fuck and paid for it that way and saved myself the plane ticket. Right? But of course, I was doing my tours because I was a social scientist and was doing field work. So again, it wasn't like it was a total loss. And I just look back and I think, I wish I hadn't wasted any of my time on tour dating and had spent all of it exploring these cultures and making observations, and maybe only had sex with the easier women there, or just hired sex workers if that's what I wanted to do, especially because, I was already there and the sex workers there are cheap. And of course, there are cultures out there where it will be easier for you to get laid. And if you're already in a culture and you can get easy sex, then certainly, by all means, go ahead and do it. But traveling to another culture to find sex is the opposite of easy sex. That is the most difficult process to try to get laid I can possibly imagine. And while there are cultures out there where it is easier to get laid, getting laid isn't easier in all of the cultures it's said to be. So sometimes you go to a culture and find that it's actually more difficult. And while you can get laid, you'll end up putting in a lot more time to get laid than you would have if you stayed home. So for instance, when I lived in Mexico, I went out to the beach and a restaurant just about every day, and the grocery store too. And I chatted up almost every attractive woman I saw whenever I was out and about. So I was chatting up at least a few women a day on slow days, and on busy days, I was chatting up like over a dozen. And so I was getting about one phone number per day, or almost one per day. But in the end, I was going on dates less than once per week. Sometimes multiple weeks would go by without a date. And I was only having sex on average with one woman per month. Now, luckily, most of these women I had sex with multiple times, but still, one per month and less than one date per week is really poor for the amount of women I was talking to every day. And that's poor by the standards of the country I came from, right? And I was going to a country where it was supposed to be better, and I found that it was worse. And why was this? Because I was dealing with things such as cultural barriers, language barriers, xenophobia, social customs and taboos that I didn't understand, prejudices and discrimination, and all sorts of other cross-cultural, socio-political issues you would have never dreamed about until you actually get to the culture and experience them for yourself. And of all of the cultures that I've spent time in, which was over 20, geo-maxing and getting laid easier than in my home country of America was only actually possible in a small fraction of them. And so if traveling was being done solely for that purpose, it would have ended up being a much larger investment of my time, money, and energy than staying home without producing much greater numbers of lays in the end, if at all. So in conclusion, what are these game hacks exactly, and why is it that some guys think that they work? Well, game hacks are all really just varying ways of meeting more women and raising your perceived status and sexual marketplace value so that you will have a greater chance with these women. And many of these hacks also make it so that you're going to be experiencing less upfront rejection. So even when you have a hack that does these things and works in these ways for you, all you've just done is basically make it seem to the woman like you have more to offer her and given her more incentive to use you. It's opening yourself up to exploitation. And also, you still have to game them, and you have no guarantee of success either. But you are guaranteed to incur some sort of ergonomic cost, meaning you are spending time, energy, and money when you are out playing the game and dating and using any of these hacks. So in the end, for most guys, most of these hacks are going to just be a waste of their time, energy, and money. And the only hacks that I really recommend using, that I myself have also used successfully enough that I think they would be worth it for just about any guy, would be to start working out and to become a pornographer. When I started working out, I was certainly able to attract some younger, hotter women, but it also helped me realize how much more I ought to be valuing my own body than the bodies of women. So it helped me to change my priorities and focus more on myself and things that would actually serve my best interest, and making investments of my time, energy, and money into myself and my future, which would have definite ROI. And 5 years later, I have grown more muscle and performed at a higher level athletically than I ever thought I would as someone near 40. And in fact, I'm actually performing better than I did as a high school athlete. So when I'm at the gym and the beach, when my muscles are showing, I get more stares from attractive women than I ever have. And I also care less than I ever have as well. And this is common for guys who get serious into working out. You get started in order to get hotter girls. Then when you get hotter girls, you realize that you value her body less than you value your own. And you stop caring what women think about you and start focusing more on what you think of yourself. And after that, bodybuilding becomes about impressing yourself when you look in the mirror, not about impressing girls, who at a certain point, you just stop bothering with because you are too focused on yourself. And focusing on fitness really takes you away from the game, because if you're serious about it, you do not have time in between sets to chat up women at the gym. And you cannot go to restaurants with her because you have a specific nutrition plan, right? So being an athlete really actually takes you away from the game. And even though top athletes have women basically coming to them because they are so physically fit and attractive, being an athlete to them is a career. So they are so devoted to it that it really interferes with their love life. For instance, it's common for athletes who are in relationships to practice abstinence with their own partner during the peak of the training year and the competition season, because they literally do not want to give any of their time, energy, or calories, or their strength and testosterone over to the act of having sex, because the sex has absolutely no ergonomic value and their athletic career has all of the value. So should you start working out to get chicks? You should start working out for any reason, be it to get chicks or because whatever. I really don't give a shit. Start working out because it's a good thing to do for yourself, for any purpose, all right? But ultimately, for it to be sustainable and successful, it really ought to be something you do for yourself and for a really good purpose, that serves your best interest and no one else's, all right? And then when it comes to the next hack I mentioned, becoming a pornographer, that is a very next level hack for both your sex life and your financial life as well. It ensures that you'll be able to meet not only a lot of women, but that all of them are down to fuck. The cost is up front, and it's not a cost that gets spent and wasted. It's an investment that has an insured ROI. And the time that you waste is minimized because you don't have to take her out on a date or spend any time talking to her and get to know her. And you can sign up to do whatever sex acts with her you want ahead of time and know that she will be down to do all of them. And pornography and being a pornographer is something that is such a significant topic that I'm going to talk more about it in a future video where I tell you everything you need to know about it in the not too distant future. So you can look forward to that. However, if you aren't just looking to fuck and are looking for a hack to get into a relationship, I'm sorry, but I'm afraid that's probably not how healthy relationships get started. And I think also that if you're looking for a way to cheat the system in order to get a healthy relationship, you're better off just rebelling against the system that has made it so that you'd have to do such a thing in the first place. You're better off just going your own way and rebelling against dating, relationships, and marriage altogether until the pendulum swings back in our direction and the paradigm shifts in our favor, which it will over the course of the next decade. So do not worry, you don't have to resort to doing any sorts of crazy game hacks like traveling around the world or trying to appear more wealthy than you actually are or resorting to more complicated forms of prostitution. Just go your own way, and if you need sex, just hire a sex worker and make a porn with her that you can profit off of. That concludes this talk. I hope I mansplained that well enough for you guys out there. Thanks for listening, and be sure to share your own thoughts and opinions by commenting below. And if you like this video, be sure to hit the like button and share these messages with everyone by sharing the video on social media and talking about these things too. And lastly, check out the links in the description below for other resources for your masculine personal development, living the life you want to as an independent man. And if you can afford to donate, please do so with the PayPal link below, because your support funds me doing this work and fighting the good fight for men like you. And you can stay tuned for the next video coming out soon, which will be on traditional conservative women. Oh, aren't they so good? Aren't they the best? Aren't they just all such wife material? Well, let's find out and talk about it. And make sure you subscribe so you'll be notified when that is. And until then, take care of yourselves, men. There's no woman out there is going to.